The transport shuttle was already venting coolant when Cal dropped his toolkit and ran. Not toward the exit, toward the crash site. People streamed past him in the opposite direction, elbows and luggage and screaming children, and he pushed through all of it because the manifest on the arrivals board had listed her pod as Base 7, and Base 7 was the one on fire. Her name was Zyla of the Veth. He had read it 100 times on the Interstellar Union matching form 3 months ago, when the Colonial Outreach Program had sent him a dossier thicker than his forearm and told him she had agreed to the arrangement. He had read every line. Her home system, her age equivalent, her profession, her dietary restrictions, which were extensive and involved atmospheric mineral content he had to order special from a supplier in New Denver. He had never seen her face. The Veth did not share images before meeting. It was a cultural thing he had respected without question. Base 7 was not entirely on fire. That had been his panic reading the situation wrong. One cargo loader had clipped a fuel line, and the resulting flash had blown the door off a receiving pod. And now there were 2 ground crew down, and medical was 40 seconds out. And standing in the middle of it, completely still, was a woman who did not look like she needed rescuing. She was tall, nearly 2 meters. Her skin was the pale gray blue of deep water, and her hair, if it could be called hair, moved faintly even without wind, each strand independent and slow like the tendrils of something that lived far below the surface. She wore a ship suit that had seen better decades, and she was holding a container roughly the size of a small refrigerator, as if it weighed nothing. Cal stopped at the edge of the wreckage. She looked at him. Her eyes were silver, not gray. Silver, like the back of a mirror, and they caught the light from the burning fuel line and threw it back in pieces. He said the only thing that came to his mind. "Are you Zyla?" She looked at the fire, then at the 2 downed crew members, then back at him. "You are Calvin Grant," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low and flat, the consonants slightly wrong in the way of someone who had learned English from a program and not from people. "My assigned partner." "Yeah, yes. Are you hurt?" She looked down at herself, a slow and thorough examination, then back at him. "Us, no." "Okay." He stepped over a piece of blown door panel. "Medical is coming. We should move back." She did not move. Her eyes went to the 2 ground crew, both of them sitting up now, one holding his arm. "They are not critically injured," she said. "Still. Smoke inhalation and all that. I am not affected by particulate matter at this concentration." Cal looked at the smoke thickening at shoulder height and then at his own eyes already watering. "Lucky you." She watched him for a moment with those mirror silver eyes, and he could not read a single thing in her expression. Not hostility, not warmth, not curiosity. Just a steady, measuring quality, like she was cataloging him. "You ran toward the fire," she said. "You were in Base 7. You did not know if I was alive." "No," he said. "I didn't." She was quiet. The container in her arms did not waver. The medical team came in loud and fast behind Cal, and he stepped aside to let them work, and when he looked back at Zyla, she was still standing in the same spot, watching him with the same unreadable expression. He walked over to her. "Is that yours?" He nodded at the container. "Yes." "Can I help carry it?" The question sat in the air between them. She looked at the container, then at him. Her grip shifted the faintest degree, not releasing, just adjusting, the way someone does when they are deciding something. "It is heavy," she said. "I can manage. It contains pressurized biological material. If dropped, the contents would be compromised." I won't drop it. Another silence. And the fire suppression foam was coming down now in white sheets, and the bay smelled like chemicals and scorched metal, and underneath both of those things, something else. Something that came from her direction, not unpleasant. Something like rain on stone. You have not asked what it contains, she said. It's yours. You don't have to tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. Her hair moved. Then she held out the container. He took it. It was not as heavy as she had implied. Not light either. It required both arms and a planted stance, and he immediately revised his estimate of her strength upward by a significant margin. This way, he said, and started walking toward the main terminal exit. She fell into step beside him, close enough to be considered together. Not close enough to be considered anything else. Outside the bay doors, the station opened up into the broad, high-ceilinged concourse of the Titan Colonial Hub, all glass and recycled air, and the low hum of 10,000 people in transit. Heads turned. They always turned when a Veth walked through a human space. Zyla's posture did not change. She walked as if no one were watching, which Cal suspected was not indifference, but practice. He had arranged temporary housing in the hub's residential wing while the paperwork cleared for the colonial land grant. 3 rooms. Private facilities. He had spent 2 weeks arguing with the union coordinator to get the atmospheric modifier installed because the Veth breathed a slightly richer oxygen blend than standard station air. He had not mentioned this to her. Your quarters have been set up, he said. I got the atmospheric adjustment approved. It runs on a timer, but I can show you how to override it manually. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he realized and turned back. She was standing in the middle of the concourse, very still, and the expression on her face had changed. It was subtle. It would have meant nothing to someone who had not been watching her face with any particular attention. But the measuring quality was gone, replaced by something that had no name Call could put to it. You modified the air, she said, for the oxygen ratio. The union specs said standard Veth atmospheric preference is about 3% higher on the O2 side. I looked it up. That modification requires a Form 47B with the Environmental Systems Office. It takes approximately 6 weeks to process. 7, actually. I filed early. Her hair moved, all of it. Slowly, like something waking up. You filed the paperwork 7 weeks ago, she said, when I got the match confirmation. She looked at the container in his arms, then at his face. You did not know if you would like me, she said. No, he agreed. I didn't. But you filed the paperwork. It seemed like the right thing to do. She was quiet for a long time. The concourse moved around them, indifferent. Somewhere a child was crying about a dropped food item, and a vendor was arguing with a shipping bot, and all of it was just noise under the particular silence between Cal and Zyla of the Veth, standing in the middle of all those people. I did not expect this, she said. And her voice was still flat, still measured, but something in it had shifted the way the container had shifted in her grip. Not released, just adjusted. Which part? She looked at him. The silver eyes caught the overhead lights and threw them back in pieces. Any of it, she said. He nodded once. Then he turned and started walking again. And after a moment, she fell back into step beside him. Still not close enough to be considered anything else, but closer than before. The container was heavy in his arms, and he did not once think about putting it down. The residential wing of Titan Colonial Hub smelled like recycled plastic and industrial cleaning solution, the kind of smell that got into the back of your throat and sat there until you stopped noticing it, Cal had stopped noticing it 3 days ago when he arrived to get the room ready. Zyla noticed it the moment they stepped off the lift. She did not say anything. She simply paused at the threshold of the corridor, and her hair shifted, and then she walked through it and said nothing. Which Cal was beginning to understand was the Veth way of deciding something was manageable. He had room 14. She had room 15, with the adjoining door he had asked to have installed, and which the hub administrator had looked at him sideways about, and which he had explained was a cultural accommodation for the Veth matching program, and which was technically true. He set the container down outside her door, carefully. "Key code is 6 digits, he said. "I have it on a card inside." He pulled a small folded paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. She looked at the paper. "You wrote it down?" she said. "Easier than memorizing on arrival day. You've been in transit for how long?" 41 days. "Right. So." He shook the paper slightly. She took it. Her fingers were long, the joints slightly more numerous than a human hand, and her skin up close had a faint texture like brushed stone. She looked at the code, then at the door. She entered it, and the door opened, and she stood in the doorway of her room. Cal had been in there 3 times to check on the atmospheric modifier and the furniture arrangement and the small cooler unit he had stocked based on the dietary list from her dossier. He tried to see it now as she was seeing it for the first time. It was not much. A bed sized for a Veth frame, which he had sourced from a medical equipment supplier because the hub beds were all human standard. A desk, a window that looked out on the station's inner atrium, 6 levels of green plants and yellow light that the hub kept going year-round for the mental health of long-term residents. The cooler with the mineral water and the atmospheric-grade nutrition packs, and 3 types of the preserved protein she had listed as a dietary staple. She walked in slowly. She went to the cooler first, opened it, looked at the contents. Her hair moved the way it had moved in the concourse when he told her about the oxygen modification. All of it, slowly. "The fermented kale root," she said. "This is the secondary grade preparation, from off-world suppliers." "Yeah, I couldn't get the primary grade. There's a supply chain issue with Veth food imports right now. The union rep told me it's been ongoing for about 8 months. But the supplier I found in New Denver has been working with Veth communities in the outer colonies for 12 years, and the review documentation from actual Veth consumers was good." She was quiet. "If it's not right, I can try other suppliers," he said. "I have a list." She straightened up from the cooler. She looked at the bed, then at the window, then at him. "You researched Veth food reviews," she said. "I read a lot on the forums. Veth expat communities mostly. There are about 6 major ones that use the human networks. You speak Veth?" "No. Translation software. But I read enough to know which posters were trustworthy and which ones were just complaining. There's a difference." She sat down on the bed, not falling, not settling, placing herself onto it with deliberate care, and then she sat there and looked at her hands in her lap. "I have done this arrangement before," she said. Cal was still in the doorway. He had not moved to come in. "The matching program?" "Yes, on another colony, 4 years ago. My previous partner was human also." He waited. "He had not read the dossier," she said. "He knew my name and my age equivalent. He did not know my dietary requirements or my atmospheric needs or anything in the supplemental material. He said he had planned to learn as we went." Cal said nothing. "It did not go well," she said. "I'm sorry." She looked up. The silver eyes in the room's light were softer than they had been in the bay, The flicker of fire gone, just the steady yellow of the atrium through the window. You are not responsible for his choices. No, but I'm sorry it happened. She looked at him for a long time. You are very easy to read, she said. For a human. Is that bad? I have not decided. He nodded. He reached down and picked up the container from the corridor. He stepped just inside the threshold, set it down against the wall where it would be out of the way, and straightened up. I'll leave you to rest. There's a shared kitchen 2 doors down, and I left a note about how the atmospheric controls work on the panel by the window. My room is next door if anything is wrong or you need something. You don't have to knock. You can just knock on the wall and I'll hear it. He was turning to leave when she said his name. Calvin. He turned back. Why did you run toward the fire? She said, and it was the same question she had asked in the bay, and he had already answered it. But the way she asked it now was different. Quieter, like she was asking a different question with the same words. Because you were there, he said. She looked at him. I did not know you, she said. Didn't matter. The silence stretched. Her hair drifted. Outside the window, the atrium's yellow light held steady against the dark of station night coming on. My container, she said. I will tell you what it contains. You don't have to. I know. She looked at the container against the wall. It is a growth medium for bioluminescent Veth flora. 6 varieties. They require specific mineral soil and a narrow temperature range, and they are very difficult to transport over long distances. Most do not survive the transit. She paused. I have been carrying them for 41 days, she said. I did not sleep during transit. The temperature regulation on my pod was insufficient, and I had to manually compensate every 6 hours. Cal looked at the container, then back at her. You didn't sleep for 41 days to keep plants alive, he said. They are not simply plants. Her voice was still flat, but there was something underneath it now, something with weight. On Veth, a household without living light is considered incomplete. These are my home. I brought them 41 days and through a fire, and I was prepared to carry them myself every meter from the bay to this room. He thought about that. What do they need? He said. For setup, I can help. She looked at him for a moment. You would need to learn the soil preparation. I can learn. It takes approximately 3 hours. I don't have anywhere to be. Another long look. The measuring quality was back, but it had changed. It was not cataloging him anymore. It was something else he did not have a word for. Sit down, she said, and she moved to open the container. He sat on the floor because there was only one chair and he hadn't thought to grab it, and she settled cross-legged on the floor across from him. And she opened the container, and the smell of rain on stone filled the room so completely it was like being somewhere else entirely. Inside were 6 sealed chambers, each one glowing a different color. Not brightly, gently. The way a coal glows when the fire has been burning a long time. This one is called Velan, she said, pointing to a pale blue chamber. It is the oldest. It belonged to my grandmother. Cal looked at the light inside the chamber, soft, patient. 41 days, he said. Yes. He looked at her. It made it. Something moved across her face. Fast. Gone before he could name it. It made it, she agreed. She began explaining the soil preparation, and he listened to every word and did not take his eyes off the pale blue light of Velan, which was the oldest thing in the room, which had crossed 41 days of space in the arms of a woman who had not slept, which was home. 3 days into the paperwork holding period, Cal figured out that Zyla did not eat when he was not there. He did not figure this out by asking. He figured it out because he kept odd hours due to the colonial land grant filing schedule. And he had a habit of checking the shared kitchen log out of guilt about the coffee maker he had accidentally monopolized. And by day 3, he noticed that the cooler in Zyla's room showed 0 access events during the 12-hour stretch each morning when he was at the filing office across the hub. He did not say anything about this directly. Instead, he started leaving food outside her door at 6 in the morning before he left. Small things. The kale root preparation from the new Denver supplier. A nutrition pack of the type she had confirmed was acceptable. Once, a cup of the mineral-dense broth he had found a recipe for on a Veth expat forum that took 40 minutes to prepare and which he had gotten wrong twice before getting it approximately right. On the 3rd morning, he left the broth. He came home at midday to find a small square of folded material outside his own door. Gray-blue fabric, soft, with a faint texture like brushed stone. The same texture as her hands. There was nothing else. No note. He carried it inside and set it on his desk and looked at it for a while. He did not knock on the wall. He did not ask what it meant. He folded it smaller and put it in his jacket pocket and wore it there like a coin. The land grant hearing was on day 4. Cal had been through land grant hearings twice before. Once for a failed agricultural plot on Mars Colony 3, and once for a mineral survey lease on the outer belt that had also failed in a different way. And he went into the Titan colonial offices with the specific body language of a man who expected to be told no. The officer assigned to their case was a small woman named Deputy Coordinator Lena Park, who had the energy of someone who had eaten a disappointing lunch and had 4 hours left in her shift. She looked at the filing stack, then at Cal, then at the Veth woman sitting beside him whose hair was doing its slow drift in the recycled office air. The joint colonial application requires co-applicant documentation from both parties, she said. We filed both packets simultaneously, Cal said. You should have a green Form 47 series from me and a blue form set from the Veth consulate covering her credentials. Lena Park looked through her stack. I have the green series, she said. And the blue? She looked again. I don't have a blue set. Cal opened the folder he had brought. Copy here, he said. He slid it across the desk. I kept a duplicate because the Veth consulate filing system lost a packet last year for the Morley-Veth couple in Colony 7, and it took them 3 months to reestablish. I checked the case record when I started the application. Lena Park picked up the copy. She looked at it, then at him. You checked a prior case record. Seemed worth doing. Beside him, Zyla was very still. Lena Park processed the paperwork with slightly more engagement than she had started with. She asked 4 questions, 2 of which Cal answered and 2 of which Zyla answered in her flat, exact English, and Lena Park took notes on all 4 without comment. At the end, she stamped 3 forms and handed back a receipt. Provisional land grant approved, she said. Confirmation within 10 days. The colonial transit for your plot transport will be scheduled through Hub Logistics. You'll get a message. Cal took the receipt. Thank you. They were outside the office in the corridor before Zyla spoke. You checked the Morley-Veth case record, she said. Before we filed. She walked beside him. Her hair drifted. That is a very specific thing to research. Interstellar joint applications have a failure rate of about 23% due to documentation issues, he said. I found that number in the union's own statistical report from last year. It seemed worth understanding why. She was quiet for a half a corridor. And the broth, she said. He glanced sideways. What about it? You made it incorrectly the first 2 times, I heard you. The kitchen is 2 doors from my room. He felt the back of his neck get warm. The mineral ratios in the recipe were written for Veth standard measurements. I had to convert. You converted mineral ratios from Veth standard to Earth standard to make broth? The 3rd batch was better. It was correct, she said. Not better. Correct. He didn't answer that. They walked through the hub's main concourse. The turning heads again, Zyla's unchanging posture, the slow drift of her hair in the circulated air. On Veth, she said, when one person researches another person's prior difficulties in order to prevent them from occurring again, there is a word for this. What's the word? She said something in Veth. 4 syllables, low and resonant, and even through his complete ignorance of the language, it sounded like something settling into place. There's no English translation, he said. Not exactly. The closest approximation would be to stand in front of the same wall so that another person does not hit it. He thought about that. That's a very specific thing to have a word for, he said. Veth believed that protection given before harm occurs is a different category of action than protection given after. It requires knowing someone well enough to anticipate. It requires caring enough to prepare before caring is asked for. They had reached the lift. Mikal pressed the call button. My previous partner, she said, did not know I had been through a failed application before. He did not ask. I did not tell him because I did not think it was relevant. He was not unkind. He simply did not look. The lift arrived. They stepped in. You have been looking since before I arrived, she said. The doors closed. The lift moved. The fabric, he said. Outside my door. Yes. What does it mean? In Veth. She looked at the lift doors. It means I see that you are looking, she said, and I am deciding whether to let you. The lift reached their floor and the doors opened, and she walked out first and he followed. And he did not ask whether she had decided yet, because she had the same expression she'd had in the concourse when she reached for the container and did not drop it. Not released, just adjusted. The colonial plot was called Parcel 19, which was the kind of name that made it sound like an unclaimed item at a lost luggage desk. But it sat on the eastern edge of Titan Colony proper, where the terraformed zone met the original moon's surface, and the horizon looked like someone had drawn 2 completely different worlds side by side and forgotten to blend the seam. Cal had seen it in photos. Photos did not cover it. Zyla stood at the edge of the prepared ground where the habitat foundation was staked out, and she looked at the horizon for a long time without speaking. The settlement crew had done the shell work. The habitat frame was up. Interior fit-out was Cal's responsibility, which he had been planning for 6 weeks in a notebook that had gotten thick enough to use as a doorstop. No, east wing gets the morning light, he said. I thought the garden room should be there. For the Velen and the others. The grow spectrum lamps are already installed, but the natural cycle would supplement. Zyla looked at the east wing frame. The grow spectrum, she said. You specified the wavelength range? 407 to 490 nanometers for the blue range bioluminescent varieties, and 620 to 750 for the red range. I got the specs from a paper published by the Veth Botanical Institute on Luna 3. It was in their open archive. She looked at him. The Veth Botanical Institute's open archive is published in Veth, she said. Translation software, he said, and a lot of rereading. She turned back to the habitat frame. The wind on Titan's surface was thin and cold, and it moved through her hair the same way the recycled hub air had, each strand independent, the whole of it slow and alive. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay. When the matching program coordinator contacted me, I declined initially. She paused. I declined 3 times over 2 months. He waited. My previous arrangement ended because I could not be what my partner needed. He was not wrong to need it. I was not wrong to be unable to provide it. We were simply not matched. She looked at her hands. The coordinator told me you had filed a Form 47B within a week of receiving my dossier. She said you had read every supplemental document and submitted 3 clarifying questions to the Veth consulate about the atmospheric requirements before accepting the match. The wind moved. I agreed, she said. Not because someone who files the atmospheric paperwork before they know if they will like a person is someone who understands that preparation is not the same as presumption. Cal looked out at the horizon, the seam between terraformed and original. I wasn't sure you'd like me either, he said. I know. I just thought, if you were going to move 40 light years, the air should at least be right. She was quiet. Calvin, she said. He looked at her. I have been cold, she said, deliberately, because I have been through this before and I did not want to be wrong again. I want you to know that the coldness is not what I am. It is what I do when I'm afraid of wasting something. He stood with that for a moment. Afraid of wasting what? He said. She looked at the habitat frame, at the east wing where the morning light would come in, the staked ground where the garden room would be. The possibility, she said, that this time the wall would be a person worth knowing. The wind crossed the surface, thin and cold and smelling of nothing at all on this raw, early terraformed ground. He said, I think I'm worth knowing. I think so also. A pause. I have thought so since the fire. Because I ran toward it? Because when I held out the container, you took it without asking what was inside. He looked at her. You take things carefully, she said. You do not grab. This is not a human quality I have observed often. He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't offer one. Oh, he looked at the east wing frame and thought about the grow lights at 407 nanometers and the pale blue light of Velan in its chamber and the 41 days she had not slept. Can I show you the garden room layout? He said. I have the notebook. She looked at him. The silver eyes in the thin Titan daylight were warmer than they had been anywhere else. Warmer than the hub, warmer than the office, warmer than the lift. Yes, she said. He pulled the notebook from his jacket. It fell open to the garden room page because that was the section he had worked on longest, and she leaned over to look at it, and her hair drifted toward him in the thin, cold wind, slow and independent. The way things move when they have decided they are somewhere safe. He held the notebook steady. She read every line. The grow lights came on at 0600, and the east wing turned the color of deep water at the edge of a reef. Zyla had placed Velen on the shelf he had built to her specification, center position, east-facing, 2 centimeters lower than the standard mounting height, because that was the angle that best replicated the grandmother's household shelf, where Velan had lived for 60 years before the inheritance. He knew this because she had told him on the 3rd night in the habitat, sitting on the floor of the garden room with both of them doing soil preparation for the root anchor varieties. And she had said it the way she said most things, flat and exact, and he had listened the way he listened to everything she said, which was completely. The other 5 chambers were placed in a pattern she called the family arrangement. Skirk, which was a Veth household tradition he had read about in the expat forums and had said nothing about because he wanted to see how she would choose to do it without the weight of him already knowing. She had placed them exactly as described in the forum posts. He had said nothing. She had looked at him afterward, one of those long, measuring looks, and he'd had the feeling she was checking whether he recognized the pattern. He had kept his face ordinary. He was not sure he had succeeded. Zyla read faces the way he read documentation. thoroughly. On the morning of day 11, which was the first morning the grant confirmation had arrived, and which was the first morning the habitat was officially theirs, he woke up to the sound of her voice, not calling him, not distressed, speaking, low and rhythmic, Veth words he could not follow, and in the garden room at the end of the hall. He lay still and listened to the shape of it, not the meaning, just the sound. On Earth he had heard once, in a documentary he'd watched as a kid, a recording of someone reading to a plant. The scientist in the documentary had said there was no measurable effect. Another scientist had said the measurement tools were insufficient. Cal had not thought about that documentary in 30 years. He got up and made the broth. Correctly this time, which took 35 minutes. He left it outside the garden room door without knocking. He heard her voice stop. A pause. Then it started again. He went to his desk and opened his notebook to the page marked Exterior Water Reclamation and worked on the figures for a while. The habitat creaked the way new structures creaked, settling into the cold, not finding its shape. At 800, she came out of the garden room with the empty cup in her hands. She looked at him at his desk. "The copper sulfate ratio," she said, "was right this time?" "Was right." He nodded and went back to the water reclamation figures. She stood in the doorway. "I spoke to Velen about you this morning," she said. He looked up. "In Veth tradition," she said, "the living light is told about new members of the household, so that the house knows them." He looked at her, at the cup in her hands, at the garden room light behind her, the pale blue of Velen visible on its shelf. "What did you tell it?" he said. She considered. "I told it that you run toward fires," she said, "and that you carry things without being asked, and that you converted mineral ratios from Veth standard to Earth standard to make broth, and got it wrong twice and then got it right." He was quiet. "I told it that you filed the paperwork 7 weeks early," she said, "for someone you had not yet decided to like." The east wing light moved. The bioluminescent chambers had a faint response to air movement and to sound, and somewhere in the morning calm of the habitat, Velen's pale blue shifted a shade. "Velen accepts you," she said. He looked at the light. "I'm glad," he said, and meant it completely. She set the cup down on his desk, not on the papers, to the side where it wouldn't be in the way. She sat down in the second chair he had bought, knowing she would not ask for one. She looked at his notebook. "The exterior water reclamation," she said. "You have the evaporation coefficient wrong for Titan's atmospheric pressure." He looked at the figures. "Which line?" She leaned over and pointed. They worked on it together through the morning, while the grow light cycled and the living light held steady in the garden room, and outside the habitat's east window, where the horizon sat between two worlds, patient, waiting for someone to learn the seam. By midday, she had stopped leaving the conversation whenever silence came. She sat in it instead. He had been doing the same since the bay, since the fire, since the moment she had held out the container and he had taken it without asking what was inside. They sat in it together now. The house knew him. That was enough. That was, as it turned out, more than enough.